Hello guys, and welcome back to Leah's Lifestyle. We're at it again with another Berkshire Hathaway Letters to Shareholders, and today we are in 1983. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. The shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway Inc. In our past year, our registered shareholders increased from about 1,900 to about 2,900. Most of the growth resulted from our merger with Blue Chip Stamps, but there also was an acceleration in the pace of natural increase that has raised us from the 1,000 level a few years ago. With so many new shareholders, it's appropriate to summarize the major business principles we followed that pertain to the manager-owner relationship. First, although our form is corporate, our attitude is partnership. Charlie Munger and I think of our shareholders as owner partners and of ourselves as managing partners. Because of the size of our shareholders, we also are, for better or worse, controlling partners. We do not view the company itself as the ultimate owner of our business assets, but instead view the company as a conduit through which our shareholders own the assets. 2. In line with this owner orientation, our directors are all major shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway. In the case of at least 4 of our 5, over 50% of family net worth is represented by holdings of Berkshire. We eat our own cooking. 3. Our long-term economic goal, subject to some qualifications mentioned later, is to maximize the average annual rate of gain in intrinsic business value on per share basis. We do not measure the economic significance or performance of Berkshire by its size. We measure our per share progress. We are certain that the rate of per share progress will diminish in the future. A greatly enlarged capital base will see to that, but we will be disappointed if our rate does not exceed that of the average large American corporation. 4. Our preference would be to reach this goal by directly owning a diversified group of businesses that generate cash and consistently earn above average returns on capital. Our second choice is to own parts of similar businesses attained primarily through purchases of marketable common stock by our insurance subsidiaries. The price and availability of business and the need for insurance capital determines any given year's capital allocation. 5. Because of this two-pronged approach, the business ownership, and because of limitations of conventional accounting, consolidated reported earnings may reveal relatively little about our true economic performance. Charlie and I, both as owners and managers, virtually ignore such consolidated numbers. However, we will also report to you the earnings of each major business we control, numbers we consider of great importance. These figures, along with other information we will supply about the individual businesses and should generally aid you in making judgments about them. 6. Accounting consequences do not influence our operation or capital allocation decisions. When acquisition costs are similar, we much prefer to purchase $2 of earnings that is not reportable by us under standard accounting principles than to purchase $1 of earnings that is reportable. This is precisely the choice that often faces us, since entire businesses whose earnings will be fully reported frequently sell for double the prorated price of small portions, whose earnings will be largely unreported. In aggregate and over time, we expect the unreported earnings to be fully reflected in our intrinsic business values through capital gains. 7. We rarely use much debt, and when we do, we attempt to structure it on a long-term fixed-rated basis. We will reject interesting opportunities rather than over-leverage our balance sheet. This conservatism has penalized our results, but it is the only behavior that leaves us comfortable, considering our fiduciary obligations to policyholders, depositors, lenders, and the many equity holders who have committed unusually large portions of their net worth to our care. 8. A managerial wish list will not be filled out shareholders' expenses. We will not diversify by purchases entire businesses at controlled prices that ignore long-term economic consequences to our shareholders. We will only do with your money, what we would do with our own, weighing fully the values you can obtain by diversifying your own portfolio through direct purchases in the stock. 9. We feel noble intentions should be checked periodically against rules. We test the wisdom of retaining earnings by assessing whether retention over time delivers shareholders at least 1% of market value for each $1 retained. To date, this test has been met. We will continue to apply it on a 5-year rolling basis as our net worth grows. It is more difficult to use retained earnings wisely. Was that 10? 10. We will issue common stock only when we receive as much in business values as we give. The rule applies to all forms of issuance, not only mergers or public stock offerings, but stock for debt swaps, stock options, and convertible securities as well. We will not sell small portions of your company, and that is what the issuance of shares amounts to, on a basis inconsistent with the values of the entire enterprise. 11. You should be fully aware of one attitude Charlie and I share that hurts our financial performance. Regardless of price, we have no interest at all in selling any good business that Berkshire owns, and are very reluctant to sell subpar businesses as long as we expect them to generate at least some cash, as long as we feel good about their managers and labor relations. We hope not to repeat the capital allocation mistakes that led us into such subpar businesses, and we react with great caution to suggestions that our poor businesses can be restored to satisfactory profitability by major capital expenditures. The projection will be dazzling. The advocates will be sincere. But in the end, major additional investment in terrible industries usually is about as rewarding as struggling in quicksand. Nevertheless, gin rummy managerial behavior, discard your least promising businesses at each turn, is not our style. We would rather have our overall results penalized a bit than engaged in it. 12. We will be candid in our reporting to you, emphasizing the pluses and minuses important to appraising business value. Our guideline is to tell you the business facts that we would want to know if our positions were reversed. We owe you no less. Moreover, as a company with a major communication business, it would be inexcusable for us to apply lesser standards of accuracy, balance, and incisiveness. I think it's supposed to say indecisiveness, but there's no D. Incisiveness, right? There should be a D. Indecisiveness, not incisiveness. Is there a difference between indecisiveness and... Okay, whatever. Moving on. When reporting on ourselves, then we would expect our news people to apply when reporting on others. We also believe candor benefits us as managers. The CEO who misleads others in public may eventually mislead himself in private. 13. Despite our policy of candor, we will discuss our activities and marketable securities only to the extent legally required. Good investment ideas are rare, valuable, and subject to competitive appropriation, just as good products or business acquisition ideas are. Therefore, we normally will not talk about our investment ideas. The ban extends even to securities we have sold, because we may purchase them again, and to stocks we are incorrectly rumored to be buying. If we deny those reports but say no comment on other occasions, the no comments become confirmation. That completes the catechism, and we can now move on to the high point of 1983, the acquisitions of majority interest in Nebraska Future Market and our associations with Rose Blumkin and her family. Okay, the next part here. Nebraska Furniture Mart. Last year, in discussing how managers with bright but adrenaline-soaked minds scrambled after foolish acquisitions, I quoted Pascal, quote, "It has struck me that all the misfortunes of men spring from the single cause that they are unable to stay quietly in one room," end quote. Even Pascal would have left the room for Mrs. Blumkin. About 67 years ago, Mrs. Blumkin, then 23, talked her way past a board guard to leave Russia for America. She had no formal education, not even at the grammar school level, and knew no English. After some years in this country, she learned the language when her older daughter taught her everything. Every evening, the words she had learned in school during the day. In 1983, after many years of selling used clothes, Mrs. Blumkin had saved $500, with which to realize her dream of opening a furniture store. Upon seeing the American Furniture Mart in Chicago, then the center of the nation's wholesale furniture activity, she decided to christen her dream Nebraska Furniture Market. She met every obstacle you would expect, and a few you wouldn't, when a business endowed with only $500 and no location or product advantage goes up against rich, long-enriched competition. At one early point, when her tiny resources ran out, Mrs. B, a personal trademark now as well recognized in Greater Omaha as Coca-Cola or Sanka, coped in a way not taught at business schools. She simply sold the furniture and appliances from her home in order to pay creditors precisely as promised. Omaha retailers began to recognize that Mrs. B would offer customers far better deals than they had been giving, and they pressured furniture and carpet manufacturers not to sell to her. But by various strategies, she obtained merchandise and cut prices sharply. Mrs. B was then hauled into court for violations on fair trade laws. She not only won all the cases, but received invaluable publicity. At the end of one case, after demonstrating to the court that she could profitably sell carpet at a huge discount from the prevailing price, she sold the judge $1,400 worth of carpet. Hydrate! I will hydrate. Thank you for that. I appreciate you, Photon. Today, Nebraska Furniture Market generates over 100 million of sales annually out of 200,000 square foot store. No other home furniture stores in the country comes close to that volume. That signaled stores also sells more furniture, carpets, and appliances than do all Omaha competitors combined. One question I always ask myself in appraising a business is how I would like, assuming I had ample capital and skilled personnel, to compete with it. I'd rather wrestle grizzlies than compete with Mrs. B and her progeny. They buy brilliantly. They operate as expense ratios competitors don't even dream about, and they then pass on to their customers much of the savings. It's the ideal business, one built upon exceptional value to the customer that in return translates into exceptional economics for its owners. Mrs. B is wise as well as smart, and for far-sighted family reasons, was willing to sell the business last year. I had admired both the family and the business for decades, and a deal was quickly made. But Mrs. B, now 90, is not one to go home and risk, as she puts it, quote, losing her marbles, end quotes. She remains chairman and is on the sale floor 7 days a week, Carpet sales are her specialty. She personally sells quantities that would be a good departmental total for other carpet retailers. We purchased 90% of the business, leaving 10% with members of the family who are involved in management and have optioned 10% to certain key young family members. And what managers they are. Geneticists would do handsprings over the Blumkin family. Louis Blumkin, Mrs. B's son, has been president of Nebraska Furniture Mart for many years and is widely regarded as the shrewdest buyer of furniture and appliances in the country. Louis says he had the best teacher, and Mrs. B says she had the best student. They're both right. Louis and his 3 sons all have the Blumkin business ability, work ethic, and, most important, character. On top of that, they are really nice people. We are delighted to be in partnership with them. Corporate performance. During 1983, our book value increased from $737.43 per share to $975.83 per share, or by 32%. We never take the 1-year figure very seriously. After all, why should the time required for a planet to circle the sun synchronize precisely with the time required for a business actions to pay off? Instead, we recommend not less than a 5-year test as a rough yardstick of economic performance. Red lights should start flashing Red lights should start flashing if the 5-year average annual gain falls much below the return on equity earnings over the period of American industries in aggregate. Watch out for all explanations if that occurs at Goethel observed. When ideas fail, words come in very handy. During the 19-year tenure of present management, book value has grown from $19.46 per share to $975.83, or 22.6% compounded annually. Considering our present size, nothing close to this rate of return can be sustained. Those who believe otherwise should pursue a career in sales, but avoid one in mathematics. We report our progress in terms of book value because in our case, though not by any means in all cases, it is a conservative but reasonably adequate proxy for growth and intrinsic business value. The measurement that really counts book value's virtue as a score-keeping measure is that it is easy to calculate and doesn't involve the subject, but important, judgments employed in calculations of intrinsic business value. It is important to understand, however, that the two terms book value and intrinsic business value have very different meanings. Book value is an accounting concept recording the accumulated fictional input from both contributed capital and retained earnings. Intrinsic business value is an economic concept estimating future cash output discounted to present value. Book value tells you what has been put in. Intrinsic business value estimates what can be taken out. An analog will suggest the difference. Assume you spend identical amounts putting each of 2 children through college. The book value, measured by financial input of each child's education, would be the same. More hydrate, huh? But the present value of the future payoff, the intrinsic business value, might vary enormously. Enormously from 0 to many times the cost of the education. So, also, do business having equal financial input and end up with wide variations in value. At Berkshire, at the beginning of the fiscal 1965, when the present management took over, the $19.46 per share book value considerably overstated intrinsic business value. All of the book value consisted of textile assets that could not earn, on average, anything close to an appropriate rate of return. In the terms of our analog, the investment in textile assets resembled investment in a large wasted education. Now, however, our intrinsic business value considerably exceeds book value. There are two major reasons. 1. Standard accounting principles require that common stock held by our insurance subsidiaries be stated on our books at market value, but that other stocks we own be carried at the lower of aggregate cost or market. At the end of 1983, the market value of this latter group exceeded carrying values by $70 million pre-tax, or about $50 million after tax. This exceeds belongings in our intrinsic business value, but is not included in the calculations of the book value. 2. More important, we own several businesses that possess economic goodwill, which is properly includable in intrinsic business value, far larger than that accounting goodwill that is carried out on our balance sheet and reflected in book value. Okay, yes, I will do another sippy sip. Mostly because I really need it today. Gosh, I'm struggling. Goodwill, both economic and accounting, is an arcane subject and requires more explanation than is appropriate here. The appendix that follows this letter, Goodwill and its amortization, the rules and the realities, explains why economic and accounting goodwill can, and usually do, differ enormously. You can live a full and rewarding life without ever thinking about goodwill and its amortization, but students of investment and management should understand the nuance of the subject. My own thinking was changed drastically from 35 years ago, when I was taught to favor tangible assets and to shun businesses whose value depended largely upon economic goodwill. This bias caused me to make many important business mistakes of omission, although relatively few of commission. Man, I'm really struggling with my words today. I don't even know this word. Keenness? Okay, there we are. Keenness identified my problem. I think that's a person. Keenness. There we are. Keenness identified my problem. Quote, the difficulties lies not in the new ideas, but in escaping from the old ones. End quote. My escape was long delayed, in part because most of what I had been taught by the same teacher had been, and continues to be, so extraordinarily valuable. Ultimately, business experience, direct and vicarious, produced my present strong performance for businesses that possess large amounts of earning goodwill and that utilize a minimum of tangible assets. I recommend the appendix of those who are comfortable with accounting terminology and who have an interest in understanding the business aspects of goodwill. Whether or not you wish to tackle the appendix, you should be aware that Charlie and I believe that Berkshire possesses a very significant economic goodwill value above the reflected in our book value. Goodness. Okay. Sources of reported earnings. The table below shows the sources of Berkshire's reported earnings. In 1982, Berkshire owned about 60% of blue chip stamps, whereas in 1983, our ownership was 60% throughout the first 6 months and 100% thereafter. In turn, Berkshire net interest in Wesco was 48% during 1982 and the first 6 months of 1983, and 80% for the balance of 1983. Because of these changed ownership percentages, the first two columns of the table provide that best measure of underlying business performance. All of the significant gains and losses attributed to unusual sales of assets by any of the business entities are aggregated with securities transitions on the line near the bottom of the table and are not included in the operating earnings. We regard an annual figure for realized capital gains or losses as meaningless, but we regard the aggregate realized and unrealized capital gains over a period of years as very important. Furthermore, amortization of goodwill is not charged against the specific business, but for reasons outlined in the appendix is set forth as separate items. Okay, so this is the same that we've talked about and many more, where it's like the earnings are all the ones before, where it's the earnings before tax income total, Berkshire, the current year, the past year, the current year, the past year, net earnings after tax, Berkshire, the current year, the past year, and then on the far left it has all the names of all the people that the insurance group, Berkshire, Warmbeck Textiles, Associated Retail Stores, Nebraska Furniture Mart, which was the new one, See's Candy, Buffalo Evening News, Buffalo Chips, Stamps, Wesco Financial, Parent Mutual Savings and Loan, Precision Steel, Interest in Debt on Debt, Special Geico Distribution Shareholders, Designed Corporations, and Amortization of Goodwill. And instead of going through all the numbers like I normally do, like I have in the past, we're just going to go to the complete total, starting with income tax, or earnings before income tax total, current year, $149,303, previous year, $77,753. Then the shares, current year, $137,499. And the past year, $49,617. And then after taxes, the shares, current year, $113,493, and the past year, $46,374. And then on this one, the Nebraska Future Mart has a number 1 next to it, and a note down here says the number 1 means October through December, and Blue Chip Stamps has a number 2, and then the number 2 means 1982 and 1983 are not comparable. Major assets were transferred in the merger. Okay. And then back to reading. For a discussion of the business owned by Wesco, please read the Charlie Munger's report on page 46 to 51. Charlie replaced Louis Vincetti as chairman of Wesco late in 1983, while health forced Louis' retirement at age 77. In some instances, quote-unquote, health is an euphemism, but in Louis' case, nothing but health would cause us to consider his retirement. Louis is a marvelous man and has been a marvelous manager. The special Geico distribution report in the table arose when the company made a tender offer for a portion of its stock, buying both from us and other shareholders. At Geico's request, we tendered a quantity of shares that kept our ownership percentage the same after the transaction as before. The portional nature of our sales permitted us to treat the proceeds as a dividend. Unlike individuals, corporations net considerably more when earnings are derived from dividends rather than from capital gains, such as the effective federal income tax rate on dividends is 6.9% versus 28% on capital gains. Even with this special item added in, our total dividends from Geico in 1983 were considerably less than our shares of Geico's earnings. Thus, it is perfectly appropriate from both an accounting and economic standpoint to include the redemption process in our reported earnings. It is because the item is large and unusual that we call your attention to it. The table showing you our sources of earnings, including dividends from those non-controlled companies whose marketable equity securities we own, but the table does not include earnings those companies have retained that are applicable to our ownership. In aggregate and over time, we expect those undistributed earnings to be reflected in market prices and to increase our intrinsic business values on a dollar-for-dollar basis, just as if those earnings had been under our control and are reported as part of our profits. That does not mean we expect all of our holdings to behave uniformly. Some will disappoint us, others will deliver pleasant surprises. To date, our experience has been better than we originally anticipated. In aggregate, we have received far more than $1 of market value gained for every dollar of earnings retained. The following table shows our 1983 year net holdings in marketed equities. All numbers represent 100% of Berkshire's holdings and 80% of Wesco's holdings. The portion attributed in minority shareholders of Wesco have been included. And then this is the same as like we've talked about this one before. There's shares on one side, the name, the cost, and the market. I'm not going to go through all the shares and numbers, all that, but we're going to go down to the total at the very bottom, which is total common stocks, and the cost being $566,348, and the market being $1,305,915. That's double, at least double, right? That's good. And then there's a couple, General Food Corporation and R.J. Reynolds Industries, Inc., that have an A next to it, and the A means Wesco owns shares in these companies. Okay, back to reading. Based upon, let's take a little sip. Based upon present holdings and present dividend rates, excluding any special items such as the Geico proportional redemptions last year, we would expect reported dividends from this group to be approximately $39 million in 1984. We can also make a very rough guess about the earnings this group will retain that will be attributable to our ownership. These may total about $65 million for the year. These retained earnings could well have no immediate effect on market prices of the securities. Over time, however, we feel they will have the real meaning. In addition to the figures already supplied, information regarding the business we control appears in management discussion on page 40 to 44. The most significant of these are Buffalo Evening News, Seas, and the insurance group, to which we will give some special attention here. Okay, and I think that is where we're going to pause and do the half mark, and I'm going to do a little YouTube outro. If you're finding this on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. And leave a comment down below. What did you guys think about that story about the lady who owned the business from, was it Russia? That was really cool. I've never heard that story before. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more, see if they're still around. But keep an eye out for part 2, which should be the same day or the next day that you'll see it on here. And until next time, guys. Bye.